Good evening. The show is the smoking section, and my name is Stephen Helfer. Welcome. As we have been running this show for quite a while, I think close to about 12 years. Unfortunately, in the new great CCTV studio that we have here, as of yet, our phone operation is not working. So unfortunately, we cannot get people to call in, but I think we will have that worked out in a relatively short period of time. So I'll have to wing it on my own. As you can see, I do not have a guest tonight. We have had some very nice guests on, but tonight, no guest. So it's me alone, and welcome. Now, we are still fighting the proposal in the city of Boston to raise the legal age to purchase tobacco products and electronic cigarettes to 21. And we have been pretty successful in getting a certain amount of support for our side of the issue. However, I don't think that Cambridge Citizens for Smokers' Rights is under any illusion. Right now, I kind of think we're like the French resistance when France was occupied by German troops during World War II. We can mount some small skirmishes. We can have some small victories like the public housing victory we had here, and the public park victory we had here in Cambridge. But we don't expect to, just as the French resistance didn't expect to liberate Paris or Lyon or drive the Germans from France, but they were able to, let's say, have a few assassinations and disrupt supply lines, basically make themselves a sore spot, a thorn in the side of the Germans. And right now, Cambridge Citizens for Smokers' Rights is making every effort to do that. And there was a hearing last Thursday at the Public Health Department at 1010 Mass Avenue in Boston, and we were there. Many retailers were there, and I think probably the number of people who spoke out against this measure was about 50% to the numbers who spoke for it. But of course, one thing is kind of interesting is that almost everyone who spoke for it was a grant-funded activist or somehow involved with getting public monies to advocate other public agencies to make the kind of, to forward the agenda of stealth prohibition, where they can finally get what they want, of course, which is the public will to initiate total prohibition on tobacco and make it illegal to grow, illegal to possess, of course, illegal to sell, etc. And so we had a pretty good showing there. We demonstrated outside in front, and then just the other night, Monday night, on the show Greater Boston, which used to be hosted by Emily Rooney, but is now being hosted by Jim Braude, Jeffrey Yalanesian, who is the CEO of Brennan Smoke Shops, and there are about, I think, 7, was on there with a doctor from the Massachusetts General Hospital by the name of John Winikoff, who is one of the most vicious anti-smokers of whom I've ever come across. He is the man who popularized the idea of third-hand smoke, which is the idea that, for example, if somebody smokes, the small residue of tobacco will cling to the person's body, and then the person walking around is poisonous. So he or she should not be let on a public bus so he won't poison the other riders on the bus, or he and she should not be able to take care of the elderly or the young who are supposedly particularly vulnerable to secondhand smoke, and in this case, third-hand smoke. So what Winikoff has done is pretty much make an effort to completely exclude and isolate smokers from the hum and drum of life, like from where they work, where they live, etc. And Jeff Yalnizyan went on, and I think it was pretty darn good. I think Jeff did pretty good, and Jim Braude, the host, I thought was very fair. And Jeff said that basically what Winikoff and his ilk are trying to do is make it illegal for adolescents to become adults. This kind of effort to infantilize the American population, have this scientific technological elite govern to the extent that even every personal liberty is subjected to the review of these scientific technological elites like Dr. Winikoff. And one thing that was pointed out, and I thought very interestingly by Braude, was, well, we think that a person who is 18 is qualified, has the judgment, has the responsibility to choose the commander-in-chief of this country, or vote for the mayor of Boston. Shouldn't that person also be considered to have the judgment and the responsibility to perhaps buy a package of cigarettes? But evidently, there are many in this scientific technological elite who believe that he shouldn't. And this was pointed out very well by Audrey Silk, who is the leader of a group in New York called Citizens Lobbying Against Smoker Harassment. And she wrote an email, a very strong email to the Board of Health in Boston, pointing out just that. Politicians are very willing and very happy to accept the vote of people 18, 19, and 20. So evidently the politicians believe that these young adults in that age group have the judgment and to be able to make that decision. They also believe they have the judgment to make the decision to join the military. And as Audrey Silk pointed out to the Board of Health, joining the military has some pretty darn dangerous health risks. I mean, we've seen all of the men who have died in Afghanistan and Iraq, and many of them who have come back with PTS or have lost their limbs and other terrible injuries. So we say that they have the judgment to sign that paper to join the military, but they don't have the judgment to buy a package of cigarettes. And I thought that was a really good point that Audrey Silk made to the Board of Health. And she also pointed out that there is already a law prohibiting the sale of tobacco to persons under the age of 18. And the stated reason for this prohibiting the sale of tobacco to persons 18, 19, and 20 is to prevent underage smoking. But as Audrey Silk points out, there is a law on the books already. And not only is that law enforced, but even according to all the data, the law is extremely well complied with. There used to be a lot of sting operations going on in Massachusetts, in Cambridge, and in Boston, where they would pay teenagers who were 17 years old, who looked much older, and they would pay them, the Health Commission would pay them to go into a retailer, a convenience store operated by some immigrant who might have difficulty telling the age of an American, and see if he could purchase a package of cigarettes, in which case they would find the retailer. but for a long time, the compliance rates have been so good that this has not happened. In addition to that, again, of course, according to the Boston Public Health Commission, the smoking rate of teenagers, that is of under 18-year-olds in Boston, is right now 7%, which is the lowest it's been since these figures were being kept. And just by means of contrast, it's interesting to note that while 7% of teenagers smoke tobacco, about 50% smoke marijuana. So what's interesting about that, as of yet, there is no legal way for a teenager to purchase marijuana, yet it's readily available everywhere. So does it make sense that banning the sale of tobacco to 18, 19, and 20-year-olds is going to reduce the availability of tobacco to teenagers? I don't think it will, but the point is, even though the availability is there, they're not smoking. Teenagers are not smoking. This is something that is just a complete lie, which is being used to forward stealth prohibition and to take away the adulthood of many people who smoke, or even people who don't smoke, because now they won't be able to, in other words, it won't be a matter of them making their own decision. It will be the nanny state making the decision for them. Another interesting point was made to the Board of Health in an email from a woman who works with Audrey Silk, a woman named Linda, and she pointed out that this is all part of the war on smokers. And she wrote, "The war on smoking has long ago escalated into a war on smokers, otherwise formerly simply known as people, citizens, or individual human beings." So now people like me who have smoked all of their lives, we're no longer just a person, we are kind of classified as a smoker. So it's a form of dehumanization. It's very similar to the kinds of programs that were run by public health authorities in the early part of the 20th century up until about the 1970s, where they talked about ridding the nation of people who were unfit to reproduce, and they forcefully sterilized thousands upon thousands of people because the people in public health wanted to remove their genes from what they used to call the gene pool. It was something called eugenics, and it was basically dehumanizing a large portion of the American population. And according to an expert on this subject at a conference I went to at Harvard University, the only group in the whole country who really opposed this were fundamentalist Christians, and we know what is thought about them these days. But back to the real issue is this dehumanization, and also this effort on the part of a technological scientific elite to infantilize the American population, at least or especially in the case of tobacco. And this war on tobacco is really a war on America, because the early colonies, first of all, tobacco was indigenous and used in the New World for 8,000 years, was revered by Native Americans. When our early colonists came here, this was one of the first things that the colonists shared with the Native Americans. This enabled all of the early colonies to survive. It provided the wherewithal for the American Revolution, for the Civil War, and the federal government's most important source of revenue up until the income tax, which was sometime in the early 20th century, I think it was 1917, maybe something around there, was tobacco. All of the signers, or many of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, grew tobacco. And in addition to that, I think the kind of contemplative, introspective, philosophical mood that tobacco engenders in people is something that is antithetical to a kind of modern idea that we're all supposed to be sitting at our cubicles, being productive behind computers, and then when we're not doing that, we're supposed to be running or jogging at the health club, and that our only real reason to exist is to avoid what doctors call this medicalization of America. We live to avoid risk factors, anything that we may perceive as shortening our life, and that we try to get everything we can to live as long as possible. And the idea of, well, why do we live, or the importance of pleasure, or the importance of philosophy, or the importance of what is the meaning of existence, which men like Sartre and Camus and great writers who many or most of whom used tobacco, spent a lot of time on. This is all kind of being eliminated, and tobacco is a very important bulwark against that, because tobacco makes you stop what you're doing and enjoy a cigarette, and makes you contemplate for a moment or two. And this is something that is antithetical to a lot of our kind of modernistic thinking. And so I think that is one of the reasons that tobacco is considered such is so hated in modern America, and that so many countries are joining to squelch this expression of freedom. It's really an expression of freedom, a freedom of the moment, to enjoy a cigarette, to sit back, to think, to relax. And this is something that any citizen can do inexpensively if it weren't for onerous taxation put on it. It's a simple crop to grow. It's a simple crop to distribute. It's very natural. And so this is something that every citizen has an access to. And unlike intoxicants, again, tobacco not only doesn't harm your ability to drive a car, it improves it. It doesn't damage your intellectual ability. It will help you write, help you pass tests, make you less likely to need a lot of these prescription drugs that are increasing. I just saw a statistic in the New York Times that between 1990 and 2010, the number of prescriptions, or the rate of prescriptions for teenagers and for young people, these people who haven't been exposed to secondhand smoke, whose mothers didn't smoke, unlike ours in my generation, between 1990 and 2010, the rate of prescriptions of psychoactive medication for people between the ages of 13 and 18 in the United States has increased 7-fold. This is amazing. The number of young teenagers taking psychoactive medications. This is all while people are smoking less, pregnant women are smoking less, exposure to secondhand smoke is less. We see younger people getting autism, needing prescription psychoactive medication, getting more asthma, obesity, and all of these things, and yet we keep being told that, well, if everybody stops smoking and there's no exposure to secondhand smoke, somehow we're going to be a healthier nation. But this is just not the case. The statistics are very clear. We always were told that if you reduce the smoking rate a lot, medical costs would go down. Medical costs have skyrocketed as the rate of smoking has plummeted. So we see all of these things, and it's very interesting. And Cambridge Citizens for Smokers' Rights, please visit our Facebook page. Just Google Cambridge Citizens for Smokers' Rights, or get in touch with us. The best way is, yes, by the internet. And you can join with us or get more information that is really very often not out there. Now, another topic that I thought was very interesting, and I saw something on the using the computer, is what's called something that's called the TPP, which is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and this is something that has roiled a lot of people because it's one of these international trade agreements that President Obama has been very enthusiastic for, and that probably some economists are for and some are against. And then people who are into deep politics thinks it's some kind of nefarious move on the part of the Illuminati or what have you and all that. I don't know. But I do know that I believe it's going ahead. And one of the things that they have done with this Trans-Pacific Partnership is to do a carve-out. So while all industries will be protected in many ways, for example, their trademarks primarily, and so that, for example, if a country agrees not to put a very high tariff on a particular, they can't all of a sudden change their mind. It's an agreement, and countries have, but somehow the anti-smoking groups, who are ubiquitous, were able to get, and of course President Obama, who has been the most anti-smoking president of history, in history of the United States, was very enthusiastic about what's called a carve-out. So that, for example, certain rights that many other industries have internationally, the tobacco industry will lose. And but I am happy to see in this this column, which is printed by the written by a member of the Cato Institute, which is a libertarian think tank, and is in the Huffington Post. At least the tobacco industries will have some rights. So, for example, tariffs on tobacco, they will be protected. So countries can't throw up tariffs on tobacco. Our American tobacco will be able to go to other countries just as their tobacco will be able to come to us. And any tariff agreement will not be, will have to be honored in the case of tobacco. This was one of the big lies. It just came to me that one of the big lies of the anti-smoking movement was that because the American population was smoking less, American tobacco companies began to import their product to other countries and hook them on tobacco. This was a total lie. Other countries had as high or higher rates of smoking before American companies started exporting. What happened is, with some of these international agreements, all of a sudden the very high tariffs on American tobacco were reduced, and therefore American tobacco could, for example, compete with Japanese products. I was in Japan in the 60s. At that time, the rate of smoking among Japanese men was about 80%. And to buy American cigarettes, they were prohibitively expensive because the Japanese government put very high tariffs on them. But in ensuing years, through different agreements, international trade agreements, tariffs were reduced so that American cigarettes could go to Japan, and they became very popular. Now, the smoking rate during this time in Japan declined while American cigarettes were being imported into Japan, but the market share of American cigarettes went up. So this idea that these evil tobacco companies were hooking the rest of the world on tobacco is one of the great lies of the anti-smoking movement. And anyone who has ever read the book 1984 can remember that there was this one figure that the government always used. This man would have his image put up on a TV screen, and there would be time periods of hate. You know, here is this particular individual, and everybody would hate it. This was a kind of propagandistic thing, a way to galvanize hatred. And the anti-smoking movement has been very, very successful at galvanizing this kind of hatred for the tobacco companies and their evil executives who hook children. And to me, this is to get people to hate to this degree is a kind of pathology. It has nothing to do with health, nothing to do with public health, and is, as I say, it's a form of pathology to inspire people to hate and to vilify. Thanks for watching the smoking section. Please watch me next week.